We're speaking to Samin Kaleem, co-founder of Gramhal, who is democratizing data for Indian farmers and talks to me about all that and what it entails. Thank you so much, Samin, for joining me on this episode of Karishma Connect. It's a pleasure to have you. I can't wait to know more. I've already got a little bit of a teaser and I am waiting to unfold it on the podcast. Thank you so much once again.
You're most welcome, Karishma. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. Well, the first question I ask is pretty simple, but also very complex. Tell me about that wonderful journey so far that you've had. What makes it special to be where you are today, and what are you most passionate about?
I think I'll start with answering the second part of your question first about what makes my journey special. I think I'm a big believer in a philosophy that I've come up with myself, which is like hard work, manifestation, and magic. And I think if you have to summarize my life, I think it fits into these three words sort of quite beautifully. Where if you put in the hard work and if you manifest things to happen, you'll see magic unfolding in your life. I do not want to romanticize the hardships of life, but I also think that romanticizing your life is very important. Uh, you have to romanticize your life. You have to be the lead player in your life. You have to be the lead actor of your life. And that is the underlining philosophy of my life. I continue to work on. I think this is very recent. This is only about 3, 4 years ago that I came up with the language to be able to articulate my life. So, like many of us in India, I think my journey also started in a small town in UP. Uh, it is called Aligarh. I was born and brought up there. We moved across a lot, but ultimately our final stop was Aligarh, where I did most of my schooling. Mm, Aligarh is a great place to be because that is where my religious identity sort of got formed as a Muslim woman in India. And then I moved to Delhi University to do my undergrad. I studied zoology, and that is when I realized I completely hate it. I spent 3 years doing it in DU, and I realized, oh my God, why did no one tell me not to do this? Um, and that is when I realized I didn't like it. So I realized I wanted to be in social sciences. I wanted to study liberal arts. I just wanted to, I wanted to study all to figure out what I want to do with my life. So I decided to apply for a fellowship program that's called Young India Fellowship that Ashoka University runs now. This is 2011. Uh, so I finished my undergrad and I realized I wanted nothing to do with zoology, but I didn't know what to do next. So I applied for YIF. And as gracious as the YIF community is, the self selection committee was like, okay, we're looking for people who don't know what to do with life. Welcome. You come, uh, you come and you join us, which doesn't happen really, because all selection committees are looking for very concrete answers of your why you want to do it. So why it was very different in that sense. So I did that for a year, and I think it changed a lot about me. I got introduced to a lot of fundamentals of society, and also found maybe that is something I want to do. I ended up going to TIS, which is Starting from Social Sciences in Bombay, where the radical revolutionary me came out, and fantastic ecosystem to be a part of. I think that is also where a lot of my identity as a modern Muslim woman, as a feminist, whatever you want to call it. It's a huge spectrum, so I don't want to just throw out words. But you started sort of figuring out yourself on that spectrum. You ask a lot of questions about yourself, about society, um, and that is where this journey sort of began. So yeah, I think that is. And then of course I worked and I built Gramhal, which is I think we'll come to that eventually. But I truly believe in my hard work, manifestation, and magic philosophy in life.
But tell me why Gramhal. Tell me about Gramhal. That was exactly my next question. What is the kind of impact that you set out to achieve and you have managed to as well?
I think I want to keep my Gramhal journey very simple and very honest. And I think that's been my attempt with all the conversations I've had. Uh, so I am an entrepreneur by chance. I really want to put it out there. It's not something that I decided on. I'm like, oh, you know what? I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be a social entrepreneur. I know how to solve this problem. Let me build a company. I did not know any of it. I didn't know how to build a company. I didn't know what social entrepreneurship mean. I didn't know what it'll take to solve this problem. But I was just very lucky that I was already working at the intersection of data and information for 6 years of my career, where I was working what information about contraception can do to the lives of women in India. And I had spent about 6 years doing that. And I saw drastic power in information and data and decision making. So I had my co-founder now at that time. He came up with the idea of Gramhal. He's from Haryana, and he's like, you know what, I want to do this. I want to see if access to information can change decision making for farmers in India. And he said, "Do you want to do it?" I said, "I don't know how to do it." He said, "None, no, neither do I." Would like, I said, "Great, let's. That's the right way to build business. None of us know how to build it. Let's go do it." And that is how it started, really, Karishma. We started on that journey, and if you have to really boil it down, it's been like you learning how to build a parachute while you're falling off the cliff. So it's been the social entrepreneurship journey for a lot of social entrepreneurs, and that is, it takes a lot of learning to know how to solve a problem. We started with wanting to solve the information problem for farmers, but the problem is huge. It's systemic. It's been around for more than a century. It's not something you show up and you can solve in like 5 years, 6 years time. Um, and we try and operate with that humility, that we don't know how to solve for it, but we are here to give a honest attempt to trying to solve that problem. So at Gramhal, we have been on that journey of giving our honest attempt to trying to solve that problem. We have pivoted multiple times our solution, but we have been married to the problem, and we said that, okay, this is what we want to solve. If solution A doesn't work, can A.1, A.2, or B or C work? So we have honestly been on that journey, and like any other social enterprise, we've had good days, bad days, great days, worst days.
Can I ask you to shed some light on that problem for the people who are not familiar with it? What is the problem that we're dealing with, and why was it so important for you to take charge, whether be it small or big? Because I'm sure that would have encouraged you to even become an entrepreneur in the first place.
So imagine you have stocks. Let's say you have stocks of any company, you have stocks of Apple, and now you're deciding about selling your stock, but you don't have information about stock market. I don't think any person can imagine that without having access to that information, you can actually make that decision. But farmers in India actually make a decision like that about selling their crops without having any access to market information. As a farmer in India, farmers don't have the real time actionable data to decide when they want to sell their harvested crop, where they want to sell their harvested crop, and at what price. So these are the major decisions that farmers are taking without access to information, and that is affecting their income, that's affecting their livelihoods, which is anyways very little.
I was interviewing an agri-tech startup long back, a couple of episodes ago, and they also mentioned to me about how it is very important for young entrepreneurs to look at that sector because there's so many solutions that you can provide to that sector, and in turn bolster growth across the nation, across the world. What do you have to say about that?
I think 100%. I think it will take hundreds of semines to be able to arrive at a problem, to arrive at a solution that can solve a problem of this scale. India has more than 50 million farmers, so you are not solving a problem for a small number of people. You're solving a very complex, systemic problem that affects a huge part of the population of this country. Um, I think if many of us attempt at trying it, at least there is ecosystem learning that happens where, 10 organizations know that this works and or this doesn't. And and hence it's important for entrepreneurs to keep trying. And it's important for ecosystem to encourage entrepreneurs to try. To expect that you'll show up and know how to solve it, as I said, is not happening. It is a journey of learning with the belief that you're doing 100% to solve the problem.
But for those hundreds of Samin, tell me, what is it that they need to know about pursuing this journey? Because this journey is not easy as well, right? You would have been through several challenges along the way. What can you share about that for people to have sort of a sense check before they think about powering change?
I think to get on this journey, first is you need an ecosystem that believes in you, that you can do it, you know. And we were very lucky when we started that journey. My co-founder and I, we had an ecosystem and a group of people who said, we don't know how you're going to do it, but here is the resource. We trust the two of you. Go and do whatever you think is right. Um, and that is the first step, Karishma. That is the first step that needs to happen. You know, where there is belief in people trying to solve problem, and there is some resource mobilization that happens to test out some potential of the idea, right? And I think second is just it takes a lot of resilience to be a social entrepreneur, because as someone like us who constantly says that we're married to the problem and not to the solution, you invested energy, resource, all of it in trying to pursue a solution, and then you start learning that it is not working to a scale that you want to work at, which basically means you have to drop the ball and try and figure out the next way to do it. And that takes resilience and humility, to say that, listen, even 5 years, 5.5 years now at Gramhal, we operate with that. We say that we still don't know the best way to solve it. We're still learning. And it takes a lot of humility and resilience to accept that. Um, and and yeah, I think you have to persevere and find three people who believe in you and your idea that you want to do. So mostly that. And in terms of specific challenge, there have been so many, Karishma. I think there have been so many. A lot is external, but a lot of challenges are internal also, right? As social entrepreneurs, I believe there's a lot of inner work that you have to keep doing. There is one outer PR, leadership, whatever face that you wear. There's a, but there's also and work that you do with problem solving and theory of change and this. But there's also a lot of inner work that I think social entrepreneurs and generally like emerging leaders in the world need to do to really arrive at that resilience, to really arrive at that humility, to really arrive at accepting failures or successes.
What kind of inner work?
The most important inner work that I have done is to work with my ego and accept that maybe I am not the best person to take decisions on many things. Maybe I am not the best person to give input and take final shots and final calls on a lot of decisions. And as a and then the organization is in lump like then who will? I'm like, I don't know. But maybe, I've not spent as much time on field as my user researcher has.
Yeah, yeah. That's true what you're saying because sometimes they say that you should, like they say that you should hire a team that actually doesn't know what you know because then they would empower you to go forward.
Yeah, and I think to actually actualize that, it takes a lot of working with your ego, right? Also because it's a rewarding sort of a ecosystem where you're an entrepreneur, everyone is patting your back, everyone is like, oh my god, you're a leader, you're going to change the world, whatever. There's a lot of carrot and stick ecosystem that even exists in social entrepreneurship, and you become the hero of the problem solving, whatever. But I think the hero needs to change. I think the founder doesn't have to be the hero, which we are a lot of time. Unfortunately, we take a lot of space. We love to talk. So we also, so I had to work a lot with that, how to take a step forward, but also take a step back personally. Um, which also links with something that I had to do in terms of inner work, which was about distributive leadership, where as a social enterprise working for empowering, uplifting, equal leveling other communities, you can't be super hierarchical. Um, you can't be the opposite of what you're trying to be in the world, right? Um, Fair wages, right kind of leaves, open door policy, having people take decisions, not micromanage. So I think it's a lot of inner work. And the list is long, Karishma, really. Empathy building, humility building, n- knowing when to say that we have failed. It is all like sort of, it's all tied together, but it's also um, very internal, you know, and no one else will come and teach you that. You have to teach yourself about that work.
Tell me, from our conversation, I know that you have been a close observer of several biases across the nation. How have you navigated those, and can you shed some light on that? Can you take me through what did you feel about it, and how have you navigated and accepted? And but at the same time, how do you think change can happen in that space? Do you ever think that there could be a zone where we are not vulnerable to these biases that exist around us?
I think the world generally has a bias about what a leader looks like, you know, and that bias is very entrenched. It's a very very deep bias where it's a pantsuit leadership. Look, that's a word that I have given it. Uh, it's always like this one tall man entering who's wearing a pant or a shirt, who's leader in a boardroom and he's dictating the boardroom and he's taken over, who talks a lot, who's calling the shots, who's hustling, all these, who's also, passive aggressive a little bit. So there are so many stereotypes about the kind of leadership that has to be. And when a woman also becomes a leader, sometimes we also tend to wear those pantsuits, right? Do I become less of a leader if I'm not, if I'm a different kind of a leader, if I'm a quieter person, if I'm a calmer person, am I not good enough as a leader? um, so I think, and I learned this actually in my one of my biggest reflections about this happened last year when we were talking about the kinds of leadership across the world, the big leaders when you see, and and is there need for a different kind of leadership? So as we're evolving, I think people like you and me have to push the envelope a little bit. People who can push the envelope should push the envelope a little bit and say that, can we talk about kindness in leadership, kindness in leading? Can we talk about empathy in leading? Can we hold you accountable as a leader? And what would that mean? But I don't think words like kindness, love, empathy has ever been spoken when you talk about leadership right now. You know, we always talk about skills. What skills do leaders have?
Call leadership skills.
Or what leadership skills do you have? And I'm beginning to think that kindness is the biggest leadership skill that is required
Yeah,
right now. You know,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and the business schools have to start teaching scaling kindness as the biggest tool for leadership. Communication is the biggest leadership failure across the world. You know, all of us talk a lot, but I don't think we're communicating well as societies to each other. There is a very larger conversation about leadership that needs to happen globally, and I'm proud to see some of these conversations coming. Like I'm very proud to see brown women taking charge in so many parts of the world, leading big companies. Uh, and it's sad that that number is very, very small, and there are too many challenges with that. But I think it needs to the conversation needs to happen, and we need to push the envelope to a different kind of leadership and demonstrate that rather than just talk about it.
I mean, you have integrated, I'm going to go towards Gramhal again and ask you this. You have integrated tech and data into the entire model. What have you noticed it can help achieve?
I think it really depends on the intent of the business. If your intent is to scale the business massively, then yes, tech is very important right now. I don't think you can take your product to 50 million farmers or even aspire to if you're not a tech product. Or forget about 50, 10 million, 5 million farmer also if you're not tech driven. So there are two parts to this answer. One is that yes, tech is important if you think about scale. And second, it's also if you think about how can you do it with less money. That is how the tech should work. The more you scale, the lesser it should cost you. um, for us, that was always the intent. Both, one is that because our goal was always to scale the information piece, tech was the way for us. We couldn't have in any way not have tech as a part of our solution. Data is a core piece of our work because we help farmers take data driven decisions, and data has to be a part of our solution. That's the core offering of our solution, really, where we tell farmers about crop market price information. So data driven decision is of course the core piece for us. About all organizations using it, I don't think so, really, Karishma. I think you really have to see if you want to work with 50 artisans in India, and your does the tech really fit into what you're trying to do? Because I also worry where you're just fitting the tech in a solution because there is a wave of tech or of AI or of whatever. I don't think because there is you don't have to just do it because that's how it's supposed to be and that is where the wave is. But it should really mean something to the solution that you're working towards and the purpose and the vision that you have for your solution.
Working on ground with the farmers, what has that taught you about life, about what the reality is? What have you kind of seen that they do differently that maybe us city goers and um, city addicts can kind of learn from?
I think, in all honesty, they've made me question the hustle culture and the rush that all of us are in for no good reason. So when I initially started working on field, and I've primarily been a city girl all my life, I would go to the village and I would just see this man just sitting like this, like his sheep or whatever cows will be behind him grazing, and he would just be sitting there. And I'm like, why he's just sitting? He doesn't have a phone, he doesn't have a book, he's not sipping a coffee, he's just sitting, looking at the road. And I come back after 2 hours and he's still sitting on the road. And I was like, my God, what like productivity conversation. And I had like this whole moment where I was like, this is unreal. And then the more I kept going to the village, I realized there are a lot of people in the village are doing that. They're just not doing anything all the time. And you probably don't have to do something all the time. And that is really my takeaway, Karishma, where I think slow is beautiful. Even with Gram Hull, as much as we are tech product and as much as month on month growth is a very important factor for us, as much as scale is an important factor for us. But my learning from the farmers that I work with is there is there is beauty and power in slowing down, which can lead to something much bigger in life. It might not lead to you getting something tomorrow or day after, which I think is the model that I have always worked on. Like, I want to work hard now and want to get result tomorrow or whatever, 2 months in. That's not how farmers work. They sow now and they get harvest 8 months, 9 months afterwards. So they're designed their life, their genes, their body, their mind around the beauty of slowness, which has so much power. I don't think you can get something extremely meaningful in life in the hustle culture. And I think that is my learning and struggle right now with the learnings that I've had from field and what I practice personally.
How did business school add to that ecosystem that you have built for yourself?
I think for me personally, so business school, any institution, is a very pull model, right? You figure out your ecosystem. There are 330 students in class. Everything is available to you. You figure out what you want to do with that kind of resource. And for me, business school was a vote of stamp, was a vote of confidence, was a stamp of confidence that told me a couple of things. One is that I have more responsibility towards business, towards environment, towards purpose, towards impact, towards everything, without weighing it down on me. I don't want to wait. I don't want it to weigh me down. To say that, oh my God, the world is my responsibility. It's not, but I can and I should play a role to the best of my capacity because I have access to so much network and resource. So business school added that confidence to who I was becoming and who I am becoming in life generally. And just by the institution support, and also again, just all most of my friends from business school are women. And I ended up learning more from the younger women in my cohort than older women. I'm 30, turning 35, and one of my very good friends is 27, one of them is 26. I had so much unlearning and relearning that happened with these younger women that I was with, who are almost 10 years apart. Um, and I was inspired by them. I'm like, this generation is phenomenal. As much as the older generation hates this generation, I am in awe of the young women of this generation. You guys are doing phenomenal, and there's so much I can learn from Karishma. And that happened. And I don't think it would have happened if I hadn't gone back to school because my peer circle is also, the bracket that I am at, unfortunately. Um, so now I have a mix of a peer circle. I have a lot of Gen Z language and my love languages stickers on WhatsApp. Uh, and um, so, yeah, I think I was left more inspired from the younger women that I met uh, at business school, and it has added a lot to uh, my confidence towards a change and voice and all of that.
And thank you so much once again for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and I have thoroughly enjoyed the ponderings and this, like you rightfully said, the non-hustle of this conversation. So thank you so much for being that way.
Thank you, Karishma.